What is up, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be going over tips to help you win close range fights in Fortnite Zero Build. As always, if you guys do enjoy this video, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you like to see more, and comment down below what your favorite shotgun is so far in Season 3. So, there are several things that I'm going to talk about in this video, but a lot of it is just going to come down to your own individual skill and like kind of comfortability and getting used to fighting. Like, these tips can help, but at the end of the day, a lot of it is just going to take time and practice. That is the biggest thing, is just to get into fights, don't get too discouraged, and try to improve over time. If you really shy away from fights and you don't get experience fighting, you're not really going to improve at fighting, and you're not going to get confident and get comfortable fighting. And I think that confidence goes a long way when it comes to this. One thing that can be really impactful, though, as far as improving your aim, is going to be to use a sensitivity that feels good to hip fire with. When I see newer players or players that aren't experienced in Fortnite, a lot of them are aiming in way too much with their shotgun, and that can be detrimental. Most close range fights, you're going to want to hip fire, so having a sensitivity that feels good to you to like track opponents and keep up with opponents, and also just like feel like you have control in close range, is essential. And the reason why you're going to want to hip fire is that when you aim in, your movement is much slower. Like when you're strafing not aimed in versus when aimed in, you're a lot slower when you're aiming in. And then you also can't like jump when you're aimed in. And so your movement is much slower when you're aiming in, and that movement is very important in close range fights. We'll kind of get to that in a bit. The only time where I really want to aim in with a shotgun is going to be like when the opponent isn't looking at me, or we're on like kind of borderline range for what the shotgun is effective in. Like if the shotgun is like, you know, not that good past 5 meters and we're in an 8-meter range fight because the opponent is running away or something, then maybe I'll aim in there. Or like if I'm playing off of cover, which again we'll get to in a moment, that's also a time where I would want to aim in with the shotgun. Your sensitivity is also going to be much slower when aiming in, and this is why a lot of people feel like they have to aim in with the shotguns too much, because I think for a lot of people when they're new to the game, the hip fire aim sensitivity feels too fast for them, so they aim in to slow it down, and then that gives them more control, which is true. But what this does is it makes it much harder for you to react to enemy movement, which is a huge positive for them. If your sensitivity is incredibly slow and the enemy jumps, or, you know, jumps and strafes to the side, or crouches, or does one of the dashes, it's going to be much harder for you to track them, and then their movement is going to be even more impactful in the fight. And like I already said, there are going to be times where you aim in with the shotgun, but it shouldn't be the only time you're shooting the shotgun. You know, if every time you use the shotgun you feel like you have to aim in to hit shots, you probably need to adjust your hip fire sensitivity. That way you can more consistently hip fire with your shotguns, and this will allow you to use your movement more in fights to your advantage, but also be able to react to enemy movement more in fights. Right shoulder peaks are also incredibly important in just every fight in Fortnite, but close range fights are going to be true for this as well. The way the camera is in Fortnite, if you're peeking from the right, you expose less of your character than when you peek from the left. So an ideal fight in Fortnite would be like you have cover and you're peeking from the right onto someone who is either like has no cover or is peeking from the left. Any fight that involves any sort of cover, you want to be peeking from the right as much as you can. There will be times where you have to peek from the left. Nothing is perfect in Fortnite, but you don't want to be doing that often or making that happen often. You also want to be incredibly careful when you're pushing into an opponent who has right shoulder peek, which again, it might happen sometimes, but this might be a situation where you want to use mobility or use dashes or try to like slide behind them or something. You don't want to just like slowly walk up on someone who has right shoulder peek, you know? You also want to use cover in fights as much as possible, even in close range fights. If there's like a tree or a rock or anything that you can use as cover, using that cover and giving your opponent a smaller target to shoot at, and ideally using right shoulder peek and giving your opponent an incredibly minuscule target to shoot at, is going to increase your chances of winning the fight. Like a lot of people, a lot of newer players, they'll just be kind of like standing out in the open, trading damage with shotguns. And there will be times where that happens, but that shouldn't be the norm. And this is another reason why cars are incredibly overpowered, even without attachments or even prior to having attachments in Fortnite, is because you can have the car as basically mobile cover, and then so you can always use that and always play off of that, or just shotgun somebody, get into the car so now they can't hit you, get out of the car, and just kind of juggle that back and forth. That was like incredibly impactful in season 1 of this chapter with like the frenzy auto shotgun and the car fighting. So using cover as much as possible, and like an addendum to that, using right shoulder peek whenever you're using cover is very, very impactful in Fortnite. Movement is also going to be very impactful in winning close range fights. Things like jump shotting or jumping into a slide so you like end up behind your opponent or to the side can make it much more difficult for them to hit you. And that should be your goal with movement. Just whatever you can do to make it more difficult for your opponent to hit you or deal with you in a fight is what you want to be doing. Like, think of it like this. If you were fighting somebody, what would be the thing that they could do to make it easiest for you to fight them? Probably just stand still out in the open and just take the shots, you know? So you don't want to be doing that. And when you do fight somebody that was hard to track or hard to fight or hard to deal with, you know, try to think about what they did that made it that way, or like why it was difficult for you to deal with them, and try to implement that into your gameplay if you can. Or you can even just watch it back in replay mode and try to like see how you can emulate what they did. Like, that is, whenever you fight somebody that is incredibly like hard to deal with or annoying, that is kind of the perspective you want to have, is like, how can I implement that into my game? The dashes you can get from the green water are also like incredibly helpful in close range fights, because you can move around super fast and basically just like make it impossible for the opponent to deal with you, especially if there's someone who has to aim in to hit any shotgun shots. If you shoot them and then dash behind them and they're aimed in with their shotgun, they're probably not going to know where you went. And then by the time they do catch up with you again, you could just dash again to another side. It's huge. I think movement is probably not as impactful as aim in close range fights, but it is up there. It is how you make yourself inconvenient to deal with. So you always want to be trying to utilize your movement in fights as much as you can. And that is a skill that you need to develop over time. And that's also why I said like getting comfortable fighting is huge, because what I've noticed with a lot of newer players, not only do they aim in too much with their shotgun, like I said, but they're not consistently able to like move and aim at the same time. And that is like a skill you need to develop in shooters. I think is just like being able to move your character while aiming at the same time, and do that kind of like seamlessly. When I mean aiming, I don't mean like aiming in. I just mean like putting your reticle on the opponent while also moving. And I do aim a lot with my strafe. If I need to make a small adjustment left or right, I tend to do that with my character's movement rather than like my aim, my right stick. One of the biggest things, I think, the next biggest thing, I guess, when it comes to winning close range fights is just going to be to get opening damage. A lot of people will force close range fights on full health opponents, and I don't think this is good. Again, like I've talked about many times throughout this video, there will be times where you just jump on somebody while y'all are both full health. It'll happen. But that shouldn't be the norm, and that shouldn't be like your target goal at all times. Medium range fights are typically much more forgiving because the guns don't do as much damage as shotguns. Like a shotgun can hit 100 plus, like no problem. And then that, you know, changes your game drastically, you know? So like the medium range weapons don't do as much damage as fast in like a single moment, typically, unless it's like a sniper or something. But also your ability to reset the fight in medium range fights or long range fights, or, you know, when you're using an AR and SMG, you have like a greater chance to reset the fight because you're not right on the opponent. You know, if you're taking a medium range fight and they hit you like 70, and then they're trying to push you with gloves, you can just run away with gloves. But if you're on them and they hit you like 150 with a shotgun, that fight is probably happening, you know? So like medium range fights, I feel like are more forgiving and allow more kind of ability to reset. So getting opening damage that way and then forcing the close range fight is the ideal play most of the time, I think. You want to get that opening damage with your mid to long range weapon and then push in to finish the fight using your mobility and using your shotgun once you get there. I think that gives you a much greater chance of winning the fight because you already have an HP advantage going into it, and you already have like somewhat of a pressure advantage, you know? Like if you're pushing somebody who's weak, that situation is going much better for you than the person who just got beamed and is now getting pushed, you know? This season with the gloves, you can glove up to them, hit them with the ground pound, and then swap to your shotgun. And this is also, like the gloves, I feel like make this kind of opening damage aspect even more important, because a lot of you, myself included, are probably annoyed when you go to fight somebody in close range and they just start spamming you with the gloves and their character is like weirdly kind of moving around, or like kind of not teleporting, but like the character movement is weird when they're gloving you, you know? And then your movement is also griefed when you're just like getting hit by the gloves and getting flung around. So if you have a hard time dealing with that and you're finding yourself dealing with that situation often, one, the dashes that you can get for the green water are also great for just getting out of like glove, or like when you are getting spammed meleeed by the gloves, using the dash to get out of that is great. But also if you're jumping on somebody who's already weak, I feel like your odds of just getting gloved to death are lower. If I'm going to fight somebody that I know is using the nitro gloves, or I want to avoid getting gloved, I want to have them as weak as possible before getting in the close range fight. If y'all are both full health, 250 health, I feel like the glove user has a greater advantage than if they are already weak. Like, I feel like that's just obvious. But yeah, if you find yourself losing to the gloves a lot, think about the close range fights you're getting in, and like, are you forcing fights on people who are full HP? And if you're consistently forcing fights on people who are full HP, that definitely could be why you're losing to the nitro gloves a lot. And then one final thing really isn't that I want to talk about, isn't that big of a deal at the moment for Battle Royale, but it's big for reload, and it's depends on the meta, and that is going to be weapon swapping. Because when we have a meta that's like a pump shotgun meta, the hammer pump is in the game, but it's not the greatest. But if you're going to be using a pump shotgun, because this is something that will typically happen where, you know, the pump shotgun becomes meta in Fortnite, you want to swap to a spray weapon in between pump shots, because the way the pump shotgun works is there's a pump animation, but you really don't need to do that. It's just basically there needs to be a certain amount of time in between shots. And so ideally you would want to shoot your pump shotgun, swap to a spray weapon, and then swap back to the pump the moment it's able to shoot again. That way you're just maximizing your damage. Like if you shoot the pump and then just you're sitting there with the pump out waiting for it to be able to shoot again, you're going to be doing less damage over time than someone who shoots a pump, swaps to an SMG, shoots a few shots, and then swaps back to the pump and then shoots it again as soon as it's ready to shoot again. And that's kind of like the skill with this, is not only, you know, managing the weapon swaps, like just doing the action of swapping weapons and aiming well while doing so, but also timing it such that like you're able to shoot the pump again the moment it's able to shoot. And it really would depend on the HP of the opponent. So like, let's say you have someone that's 250 health and you hit them 150 with your opening pump shot, and then you swap to your spray weapon. At that point, I might just stick with my spray weapon to get the kill, because, you know, we only need 100 damage, and I probably am going to be doing close to 100 damage by the time my pump is ready to shoot anyways. But like, let's say they're a 250 health opponent and you get a bad pump shot. You hit them like 50, like it's not very good. Then I'm going to swap to my spray weapon, you know, fill that time in between pump shots with some damage, but also swap. I'm like more eager to swap back to the pump because that first pump shot wasn't good and I want to finish them with the second pump shot. If the first pump shot is incredibly hard, you could just stick on the SMG to get the kill. But if the first pump shot isn't that great, then you're definitely going to want to swap back to the pump. And if it's kind of like a mid-ish pump shot or not the greatest SMG damage you got back, or you got out of it, then I definitely do want to swap back to the pump as well. The only times where I'm really not wanting or not worried that much about swapping back is when I know they're incredibly weak, and so like that time to swap weapons doesn't really matter. I'd rather just shoot an extra SMG shot or two, you know? Or if range is a problem, like if they're out of pump shotgun range by the time that you are able to get back to it for whatever reason, then I might just stick on the SMG for those situations as well. But just in general, getting used to weapon swapping and timing this well is essential when we have a pump shotgun meta in zero build. Another time where maybe you wouldn't want to be as concerned about swapping is if you're playing off of cover, like a bunker or something, and you like shoot your pump shot and then you go back into cover and then you're peeking again when the pump is ready to shoot. But if it's like a scuffed fight where you and the opponent are trading damage, then getting the pump into spray back to pump, swap fluidly and timing it well, depending on the fire rate of the pump during that time, is essential. And like I said, that really isn't as much of a factor right now because like I think for zero build most people probably prefer the gatekeeper combat shotguns, but when we do eventually get into a pump meta, or if you're playing reload, I think the thunder or the pump are just the best shotguns. Like getting that down I think is really big. But that is going to be it for this video. Aim matters. Get a hipfire sensitivity that feels good for you. If your hipfire sensitivity feels too fast or too slow, try to fine tune that to your liking. try to, you know, utilize your movement in fights as much as possible. Try to get opening damage to start fights as much as possible. And just in general, try to get comfortable fighting. If you play the game and try to play to avoid all conflict, you can definitely get wins like that. But you're probably not going to improve like that. And eventually you're going to get to the point where you're playing better people and just hiding is less likely to work out. I think a lot of this comes down to mechanics and quick decision making, and the only way you're going to build those mechanics is by getting in fights. And I think a lot of that decision making you also build over time by getting in fights, and it definitely helps if you're more comfortable and less stressed fighting. And I think that just comes down to playing the game and getting in fights and not being overly concerned about the result. But that is going to be it for this video. I hope you guys found this helpful, informative, interesting. If you did, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and let me know down below what shotgun is your favorite this season. And I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.